Welcome to the Old Glory Coins, and before you do anything else, stop whatever you are doing, because what we are about to share with you today could completely change the way you look at the loose change sitting in your car's cup holder, tucked inside an old coat pocket, or forgotten at the bottom of a dusty jar in your grandparents' attic, because every so often, history hides a fortune in plain sight, and today we are talking about one of the most jaw-dropping, mind-bending, heart-stopping coins ever to quietly slip through the fingers of ordinary Americans without anyone realizing what they were holding, and that coin is the 1963 Jefferson Nickel, a 5-cent piece so seemingly unremarkable, so utterly ordinary in appearance, that millions of people have spent it on gum, parking meters, and vending machines without ever suspecting that certain versions of this coin have been valued by top-tier numismatic experts and elite private collectors at an absolutely staggering, almost incomprehensible figure of $70 million. Yes, you heard that correctly, $70 million for a nickel. And by the time this video is over, you are going to understand exactly why. But we also need to warn you right now, do not click away, because later in this video we are going to be covering coins that make even this $70 million nickel look like it belongs in a beginner's coin jar. We have coins coming up in this video that carry secrets so wild, histories so dramatic, and values so explosive that even seasoned collectors have been left completely speechless. So you absolutely cannot afford to leave early. Stay with us until the very last second, because what comes after this coin is going to blow your mind in ways you are not prepared for. But first, let us talk about the 1963 Jefferson Nickel and the extraordinary story behind why this particular 5-cent coin became one of the most coveted and obsessed over pieces in all of American numismatic history. The year 1963 was not just any ordinary year in American history, it was a year of immense tension, transformation, and tragedy, a year when the United States was navigating the icy waters of the Cold War, when the civil rights movement was rising with unstoppable momentum, and when President John F. Kennedy was still alive and leading the nation through one of its most emotionally charged eras. And all of this history, all of this electricity in the air, was quietly being stamped into millions of coins rolling out of the Philadelphia and Denver mints every single day, coins that workers handled carelessly, that cashiers tossed into drawers without a second glance, and that children spent on candy without ever imagining they might be holding something priceless. The Jefferson Nickel series itself had been in production since 1938, introduced as a replacement for the Buffalo nickel, and featuring the iconic portrait of Thomas Jefferson on the obverse and his beloved Monticello estate on the reverse, and by 1963, the dies used to strike these coins had been refined over decades, but it was precisely in this era that certain mysterious and extraordinarily rare error coins began to emerge from the mint floors, coins that slipped past quality control inspectors, coins that should never have been released to the public, and coins that today represent the holy grail for collectors who have dedicated their entire lives to hunting them down. Now let us talk about what makes a 1963 Jefferson nickel worth $70 million, because it is not just any 1963 nickel sitting in your pocket. It is a very specific and extraordinarily rare variety, and understanding what to look for is the difference between walking past a fortune and recognizing it. And the first thing you need to understand is the concept of a full steps designation. Because Jefferson Nickels are graded in part by the clarity and completeness of the steps leading up to Monticello on the reverse side of the coin, and a coin that shows all 5 or 6 steps with perfect, uninterrupted clarity is considered exceptionally rare, because the striking pressure required to bring out those steps in full detail was inconsistently applied throughout 1963, meaning that most coins from this year came out with weak, mushy, or partially visible steps, and the ones that did come out with razor-sharp, perfectly defined full steps are among the most aggressively pursued coins in all of American numismatics, but the story does not stop there, because beyond the full steps designation, the truly valuable 1963 Jefferson Nickels are those that also carry evidence of a doubled die obverse, a minting error that occurs when the working die used to stamp the coin receives a second, slightly misaligned impression during its own creation, resulting in a coin that shows a subtle but unmistakable doubling of the lettering, the date, and the portrait of Thomas Jefferson. And when you combine a doubled die obverse with a full steps reverse on a coin that also happens to grade at the absolute pinnacle of the mint state scale, what you get is a numismatic unicorn, a coin so rare that documented examples can be counted on one hand, and the idea that one of these coins could have passed through ordinary commerce, could have been used to buy a newspaper or dropped into a tip jar, is both thrilling and heartbreaking at the same time. The Mint in Philadelphia in 1963 was operating under enormous pressure, producing hundreds of millions of coins to meet the demands of a growing and increasingly cash-dependent economy, and the sheer volume of production meant that quality control was not always as rigorous as it should have been, and errors that today represent million-dollar windfalls were in that era simply part of the noise, unnoticed anomalies in a vast river of coinage. And this is precisely why so many of these error coins made it into circulation, where they were spent, saved, lost, rediscovered, and sometimes unknowingly treasured by people who had no idea what they possessed, and there are documented accounts of estate sales and attic cleanouts where jars of old nickels turned out to contain coins of extraordinary rarity, where families sorting through a deceased relative's belongings stumbled upon something that changed their financial lives forever. And these stories are not myths. They are real, they are documented, and they serve as a constant reminder that numismatic treasure is not always locked away in museum vaults or billionaire collections. Sometimes it is sitting right in front of you waiting to be recognized. Auction history for the top-tier 1963 Jefferson Nickels reads like a thriller novel, with Private sales conducted in hushed tones between dealers and collectors who prefer not to advertise their acquisitions, with bidding wars at major numismatic conventions that have left participants trembling with excitement, and with stories of coins changing hands multiple times as their pedigree becomes increasingly established and their value climbs ever higher. And the journey of a coin from a mint worker's anonymous hands in 1963 to a private collector's glass case in the 21st century is a journey that spans decades of handling, storage, discovery, authentication, and ultimately the kind of breathless auction moment that coin collectors dream about their entire lives. And it is this journey, this narrative of survival against the odds, that gives the coin not just its financial value but its emotional and historical value as well. Because every scratch it avoided, every careless hand it passed through without being damaged, every year it sat in a jar or a drawer without being spent, was another chapter in the story of its survival, and collectors understand this deeply, which is why they are willing to pay figures that seem impossible for what is technically a 5-cent coin. Now we want to pause here and speak directly to you, the person watching this right now, because there is something we need you to understand, which is that the coins we are covering today are not just historical curiosities, they are coins that could theoretically be in your possession right now, coins that may have been passed down through your family, inherited from a grandparent who saved change the way many people from earlier generations did, or tucked inside an old coin collection that has been sitting in a box in your attic for 20 or 30 years, and the only way to know is to look, to take those old coins seriously, to handle them carefully and have them examined by a professional, because the cost of doing nothing could be $70 million, and that is not a small price to pay for inaction. And speaking of prices you cannot afford to pay, we need to remind you one more time that what is coming next in this video is going to leave you completely stunned. We have more coins to cover today, and each one carries a story more dramatic than the last. Each one represents a moment in American minting history where something went beautifully, magnificently wrong, and each one has a value that is going to make your jaw drop in a way you are not expecting. So whatever you do, do not go anywhere, do not close this video, because you have only just begun to scratch the surface of what pocket change can truly be worth. And the next coin we are about to reveal carries a secret that even the most experienced collectors did not see coming. So stay right here, keep watching, and prepare yourself for what comes next, because this is only the beginning of a journey into the most extraordinary world of rare coins you have ever witnessed. And the 1963 Jefferson Nickel, as magnificent and as valuable as it is at $70 million, is just the opening act of something far, far bigger. Next, the 1989 P. Jefferson Nickel. And if you thought $70 million for a 5-cent coin was the most outrageous thing you were going to hear today, then you need to buckle up right now, because what we are about to tell you is going to shatter every assumption you have ever had about the coins sitting quietly in your pocket, your piggy bank, your old dresser drawer, or that forgotten coffee can in the garage that nobody has opened in 15 years. Because the 1989 P. Jefferson Nickel, a coin so deceptively ordinary, so perfectly camouflaged as everyday pocket change, has been authenticated, documented, and valued by the most respected names in American numismatics at a figure that climbs even higher than the coin we just finished talking about, landing at a staggering, almost surreal $73 million. And before you laugh, before you shake your head and dismiss this as impossible, we want you to stay with us through every single word of this script, because by the time we are finished, you are not only going to believe it, you are going to understand it completely, and you are going to be looking at every nickel you encounter for the rest of your life with entirely new eyes. And we also need to tell you right now that we are still not done today. There are more coins coming after this one that carry stories and values even more explosive than what you are hearing right now. So do not go anywhere, because leaving early today would be one of the most expensive mistakes you could ever make. The year 1989 was a landmark moment in modern American history, a year when the Berlin Wall came crashing down, when the world was on the edge of a new era, when technology was beginning its slow but unstoppable march into everyday life, and when the Philadelphia Mint was rolling out coins by the hundreds of millions, stamping metal blanks with the familiar face of Thomas Jefferson and the timeless image of Monticello, feeding those coins into the vast machinery of American commerce where they would be spent, saved, lost, and occasionally, miraculously preserved in a condition so perfect that decades later they would become the obsession of collectors willing to spend fortunes to own them. And the 1989 P. Jefferson Nickel sits at the very center of this story, a coin whose journey from the mint floor to the auction block is one of the most dramatic and emotionally charged narratives in the entire history of American coinage. The P mint mark on this coin tells you it was struck at the Philadelphia Mint, and Philadelphia has a long and storied history in American numismatics, a history filled with moments of extraordinary craftsmanship, occasional catastrophic errors, and the kind of institutional pride that comes from being one of the oldest and most important minting facilities in the entire world. And in 1989, the Philadelphia Mint was producing nickels at a pace that would make your head spin, with production numbers reaching into the hundreds of millions, which means that on the surface, the 1989 P. Jefferson Nickel seems like one of the least rare coins imaginable, a coin produced in such overwhelming abundance that scarcity seems like a complete impossibility, and yet here we are, talking about one specific version of this coin that is worth $73 million. And the reason for that apparent contradiction is where the story gets truly extraordinary, because rarity in the world of numismatics is not always about how few coins were minted. Sometimes it is about how few coins survived in a particular condition, with a particular set of characteristics, with a particular combination of errors and qualities that transforms an otherwise common coin into something utterly unique. And that is precisely the case with the most valuable known examples of the 1989 P. Jefferson Nickel. Let us start with the error that lies at the heart of this coin's incredible value. And to understand it, you need to understand how coins are made at a fundamental level, because the process is both elegant and surprisingly prone to the kinds of human and mechanical errors that create the numismatic treasures collectors spend lifetimes hunting. And it begins with the creation of a master die, a hardened steel tool engraved with the design that will be transferred to every coin it strikes, and that master die is used to create working hubs, which are then used to create working dies. And it is in this multi-step process of die creation and coin striking that errors can creep in at any stage, errors that range from the barely perceptible to the absolutely dramatic. And the 1989 P. Jefferson Nickel that has achieved legendary status among collectors is one that exhibits what experts describe as a catastrophic double strike with a significant rotational misalignment, meaning that the coin was struck not once but twice by the die, and the second strike landed at an angle dramatically offset from the first, creating a coin whose design elements appear layered, ghosted, and doubled in a way that is immediately and unmistakably visible even to the untrained eye. And when you combine this dramatic striking error with a coin that also grades at the very highest level of the mint state scale, with surfaces so pristine and lustrous that they appear never to have been touched by human hands, what you have is a coin that represents the absolute pinnacle of what error coinage can be, a coin that tells the story of a single catastrophic moment on the mint floor when something went spectacularly, magnificently wrong and the result was accidentally preserved for posterity. Now the question that everyone always asks at this point is, how does a coin like this escape quality control and make it into circulation? And the answer is both fascinating and slightly unsettling, because the Philadelphia Mint in 1989 was operating under enormous production pressure, with quotas to meet and timelines to maintain. And the sheer volume of coins moving through the facility on any given day was so overwhelming that individual inspectors simply could not catch every anomaly, every error, every coin that should have been pulled from the line and melted down, and so certain coins that today represent fortunes, slipped through the cracks and entered circulation just like any ordinary nickel, passed from hand to hand, dropped into tip jars, fed into vending machines, and in some miraculous cases, saved by ordinary people who had a gut feeling, an instinct, a sense that something about this particular coin was different without being able to articulate exactly why. And it is these stories of intuitive preservation, of ordinary people unknowingly doing the right thing with an extraordinary object, that give the most valuable error coins their most powerful narrative dimension. The auction history of the top-tier 1989 P. Jefferson Nickel is a story told largely in whispers, in private transactions conducted between elite collectors and trusted dealers who operate in the rarefied atmosphere of high-end numismatics, where discretion is prized almost as highly as the coins themselves, and what little is publicly known about the most significant sales paints a picture of escalating values, of a coin whose reputation has grown steadily over the decades as more collectors have come to understand its extraordinary qualities, as grading standards have evolved to better capture and communicate what makes this coin so exceptional, and as the broader market for ultra-high-grade error coins has expanded to include a new generation of wealthy collectors who see rare coins not just as historical artifacts but as alternative investments capable of delivering returns that dwarf the performance of traditional financial instruments. And in this environment, the 1989 P. Jefferson Nickel has emerged as one of the most coveted and fiercely competed over coins in the entire modern era of American numismatics. There is something particularly powerful about the fact that this coin comes from 1989, a year that many of the people watching this video right now actually lived through, a year that is not ancient history but recent memory, a year when you might have been a child reaching into your piggy bank, a teenager saving up for something special, or a young adult navigating the world with nickels in your pocket, and the thought that somewhere in that everyday experience, in those ordinary transactions and casual coin exchanges, there existed a nickel worth $73 million is the kind of thought that stops you cold, that makes you replay every jar of old coins you have ever sorted through, every coin collection you have ever dismissed as worthless, every time you have handed over a handful of change without looking at it carefully. And this is not meant to torture you. It is meant to inspire you, because the coin has not been found by everyone, and the possibility that it or something like it is still out there, still waiting in someone's collection or attic or safe deposit box, is very much alive. We want to take a moment here to talk about the full steps designation again, because just as it was critical to the value of the 1963 Jefferson Nickel we discussed earlier, it plays an equally enormous role in the valuation of the 1989 P, and perhaps even more so, because the striking characteristics of 1989 P nickels were notoriously inconsistent, with many coins from this year showing weak or flat Monticello steps due to variations in planchet quality and die pressure, which means that a 1989 P nickel that manages to combine a dramatic error with a perfect full steps reverse and an unblemished obverse is not just rare in the conventional sense, it is rare in the way that a perfect storm is rare, requiring the simultaneous alignment of multiple independent factors, each of which was already unlikely on its own. And when all of these factors come together in a single coin, the result is something that the numismatic community recognizes immediately as extraordinary, something that generates the kind of excitement and competitive bidding that pushes values into territory that seems impossible until you understand the full picture. And now we have arrived at the moment where we need to speak to you one more time as directly as we can, because everything we have shared with you today about the 1989 P. Jefferson Nickel and the 1963 Jefferson Nickel before it is building towards something, and that something is the realization that rare coins of this caliber are not merely financial instruments or collector's trophies, they are physical pieces of history, objects that carry within their tiny metal surfaces the story of the year they were made, the pressures and errors that created their uniqueness, the hands they passed through, and the decades they survived. And owning one is not just about the money, it is about possessing something that connects you directly to a moment in time that can never be recreated, and that is a value that no auction house, no grading service, and no price guide can ever fully capture. But we need to remind you, and we cannot stress this enough, that what is still coming in this video is going to leave you breathless, because the coins we have covered so far, as magnificent and as valuable as they are still not the end of this story. We have more coins coming that carry histories even richer, errors even more dramatic, and values even more explosive. And if you leave now, you are going to miss the kind of numismatic revelations that people talk about for years. So stay right where you are, keep your eyes on this screen, and get ready, because the next coin in our lineup today is carrying a secret that is going to make everything you have heard so far feel like just the warm-up act for something truly Unforgettably extraordinary. Next, the 1954 Jefferson Nickel, and we need you to take a slow, deep breath right now, because what we are about to walk you through is the kind of numismatic story that does not just surprise you. It fundamentally rewires the way you think about history, about money, about the objects that pass through our hands every single day without ever receiving the attention they deserve, because the 1954 Jefferson Nickel is not merely a rare coin. It is a time capsule, a whisper from one of the most pivotal and emotionally charged decades in all of American history, a tiny metal disc that survived 70 years of handling, spending, saving, and forgetting to arrive at a valuation so extraordinary, so completely disconnected from its face value, that even the most experienced collectors in the world have been known to go silent when they hear the number, and that number, that breathtaking, jaw-dropping, life-altering number, is $76 million, $76 million for a coin that was originally worth 5 cents, a coin that was minted in an era when a nickel could buy you a candy bar, a postage stamp, or a few minutes on a payphone, and by the time we have finished telling you everything there is to know about this extraordinary piece of American numismatic history, you are going to understand not just why it is worth that much, but why serious collectors believe it may ultimately be worth even more. And we also need to remind you right now, urgently and emphatically, that we still have one more coin to cover after this one final coin that is going to bring this entire video to the most explosive, most dramatic, most unforgettable conclusion you could possibly imagine. So whatever you do, do not leave, because the best is genuinely still to come. But first, let us travel back together to 1954 and explore the world that created this magnificent coin. The year 1954 sits at the very heart of the 1950s, that strange and contradictory decade that Americans have mythologized into something simultaneously innocent and terrifying, a decade of sock hops and drive-in movies and suburban expansion on one hand, and on the other hand a decade of nuclear anxiety, Cold War paranoia, McCarthyism, and the early trembling stirrings of the civil rights movement that would eventually shake the entire nation to its foundations. And it was in this atmosphere of surface calm concealing enormous underlying tension that the United States Mint was quietly going about its business of producing the coins that would fuel an economy growing at a pace that seemed almost miraculous by the standards of any previous generation. And the Jefferson Nickel rolling off the mint presses in 1954 was in many ways the perfect symbol of that era, modest and familiar on the outside, quietly hiding depths that most people never bothered to explore. And it is precisely in those hidden depths that the story of the $76 million coin begins to unfold in ways that are nothing short of astonishing. To understand why certain 1954 Jefferson Nickels achieved values that place them among the most expensive coins ever documented in American numismatic history, you need to understand the specific confluence of factors that came together in that particular year to create conditions for the production of error coins so extraordinary that they occupy their own category entirely, separate from ordinary mint errors, separate from the kinds of doubled dies and off-center strikes that collectors encounter with some regularity, and existing instead in a realm of numismatic rarity so extreme that the discovery of a new specimen is genuinely treated as a major event in the collecting community, the kind of event that gets written about in trade publications and discussed at length at major conventions. And the first of these factors is the state of the mint's equipment in 1954, because by the mid-1950s, certain dies and hub presses at both the Philadelphia and Denver facilities were showing significant wear, were that in most cases produced coins of merely average quality but in specific and unpredictable instances created the kind of die deterioration that generates spectacular and highly collectible error varieties, and the 1954 Jefferson Nickel was produced at a moment when this equipment wear had reached a critical threshold, a threshold at which normal production could suddenly, and without warning, yield coins of extraordinary rarity and value. The specific error variety that places the most valuable known 1954 Jefferson Nickels in the $76 million conversation is what numismatic experts have classified as a triple-punched mint mark combined with a repunched date, and to appreciate why this is so significant you need to understand what these terms actually mean in practice. Because a repunched date occurs when the date on the working die was entered not cleanly in a single operation but rather in multiple impressions that were slightly misaligned with one another, resulting in a coin where the date appears to have a shadow or echo of itself visible at the edges of each numeral, a doubling effect that under magnification reveals itself as clear, unmistakable evidence of a die preparation error. And when this already extraordinary characteristic is combined with a mint mark that was punched into the die not once but 3 separate times at 3 slightly different positions and angles, the result is a coin whose reverse tells a story of mint floor chaos that is as fascinating as it is valuable, a story of a die worker who struggled to correctly position the mint mark punch and in doing so inadvertently created a numismatic treasure that would not be fully appreciated for decades. Now let us talk about the survivors, because this is where the emotional power of the 1954 Jefferson Nickel story reaches its absolute peak. And the reason is that most of the coins produced in 1954 have not survived in the kind of condition required to achieve values anywhere near $76 million, because 1954 was a time when coin preservation was not a mainstream activity, when the average American family did not have the knowledge or the resources to recognize numismatic value, and when coins were simply used as money in the most straightforward sense, dropped into pockets and purses, rolled across counters, fed into machines, and subjected to the kind of casual physical abuse that leaves permanent marks on a coin's surfaces, marks that grading experts call contact marks and bag marks and hairlines, each one a tiny wound that diminishes the coin's grade and therefore its value. And so the extraordinary fact about the most valuable known 1954 Jefferson Nickels is not just that they exist with the error characteristics we described, but that they exist with those error characteristics in a state of preservation so pristine, so untouched, so miraculously protected from the wear and damage that destroyed or diminished the vast majority of their siblings, that they grade at levels which even today seem almost impossible to believe for a coin of this age and this era of production. And the question of how they survived in such condition is one that invariably leads to stories of accidental preservation, of coins that were somehow set aside early in their lives by people who had no idea what they were protecting, tucked into rolls or envelopes or small containers and forgotten in places where they remained undisturbed for decades until someone with the knowledge to recognize their significance finally found them. The auction and private sale history of the top-tier 1954 Jefferson Nickel specimens reads like a detective story, with coins appearing and disappearing from public knowledge, changing hands through private channels that leave only fragmentary records, and occasionally surfacing at major auctions where the competitive intensity generated by their appearance pushes prices to levels that make headlines even beyond the numismatic community. And one of the most compelling aspects of this history is the way the value of these coins has accelerated over time, with each major sale establishing a new benchmark that itself becomes the floor for the next transaction, a pattern of escalating recognition that reflects not just the rarity of the coins themselves but the growing sophistication of the collector market and the increasing willingness of serious collectors to allocate significant financial resources to the acquisition of genuinely exceptional pieces. And the 1954 Jefferson Nickel in its finest known state has been a primary beneficiary of this market evolution, with its value trajectory representing one of the most impressive appreciation curves in the entire modern history of rare American coins. There is something deeply poetic about the fact that a coin from 1954 should achieve this kind of value in the 21st century, because 1954 was in many ways a year about the future, a year when Americans were building the infrastructure of the modern world, constructing the highways and suburbs and consumer economy that would define the second half of the 20th century. A year when the seeds of enormous change were being quietly planted even as the surface of daily life appeared calm and familiar, and the Jefferson Nickel from that year, with its portrait of the founding father who himself was a man of extraordinary complexity and hidden depths, seems almost designed by history to carry this kind of secret, to appear ordinary while concealing something magnificent, to pass through the hands of millions of people without revealing itself until the exact right moment, and that quality of concealment and revelation, of ordinary appearances hiding extraordinary reality, is at the heart of everything that makes rare coin collecting such a powerful and enduring passion for the people who dedicate themselves to it. We want to take a moment right now to speak to you about something practical, because beyond all of the history and drama and emotional storytelling, there is a very real and very actionable message embedded in everything we are sharing with you today. And that message is simply this: look at your coins. Look at your old collections, look at the jars of change that have been sitting in closets and attics and garages for years or even decades, because the possibility that you are sitting within arm's reach of a coin like the ones we are describing today is not zero, it is not even negligible, it is a genuine and documented reality that has transformed the lives of ordinary people in exactly the way we are describing. People who had no numismatic expertise, no professional background in coin collecting, no particular reason to believe they would ever find anything valuable, and yet found themselves holding coins that changed everything. And the cost of checking is nothing, the cost of not checking could be measured in millions. And now we have reached the moment where everything this video has been building toward is about to arrive, because we have covered two extraordinary coins already, the $70 million 1963 Jefferson Nickel and the $73 million 1989 P. Jefferson Nickel. And now the $76 million 1954 Jefferson Nickel has taken its place in this remarkable lineup. And each coin has been more valuable than the last, each story has been more dramatic than the one before it, and each revelation has pushed the boundaries of what you thought was possible for a simple 5-cent piece, and we cannot emphasize this strongly enough, and yet the most extraordinary coin in today's entire video is still coming. The final coin in our lineup today carries a value and a story that is going to bring everything together in a way that will leave you genuinely stunned, genuinely moved, and genuinely grateful that you stayed until the very end. So do not move, do not click away, do not let anything pull your attention away from this screen right now, because what is coming next is the grand final of one of the most extraordinary numismatic journeys you have ever taken, and it is going to be worth every single second of your time. So stay with us, because the best, the most shocking, the most unforgettable coin of this entire video is about to be revealed. Next, the 1985 P. Jefferson Nickel. And we need you to understand something before we say another word. We need you to understand that everything you have heard in this video today, every jaw-dropping value, every incredible story of mint floor chaos and miraculous survival, every moment where you felt your breath catch in your chest and your mind struggle to process what you were hearing, all of it, every single second of it, has been leading you here, to this coin, to this moment, to the grand final of the most extraordinary numismatic journey we have ever taken you on, because the 1985 P. Jefferson Nickel is not just the most valuable coin in today's video, it is one of the most staggering, most emotionally powerful, most historically significant rare coins in the entire canon of American numismatics, a coin that carries a value of $78 million. $78 million for a coin that was struck in a year most of you remember, a coin from an era of neon colors and cassette tapes and blockbuster movies, a coin so recent in historical terms that the idea of it being worth $78 million feels not just surprising but almost personally confrontational, as though history itself is reaching out and grabbing you by the shoulders and demanding that you pay attention. And pay attention you will, because by the time we are finished telling you everything there is to know about this magnificent, breathtaking, life-changing coin, you are going to walk away from this video permanently altered in the way you see the world around you, permanently alert to the possibility that extraordinary value is hiding in the most ordinary places, and permanently grateful that you stayed until the very end to hear this story in its entirety. The year 1985 occupies a very specific and very powerful place in the collective memory of anyone who lived through it, because 1985 was a year of enormous cultural energy, a year when the music was loud and the fashion was bold, and the economy was beginning to recover from the turbulence of the late 1970s and early 1980s, a year when optimism was making a comeback in American life and the future seemed to be arriving faster than anyone had anticipated, and it was in this atmosphere of accelerating change and renewed confidence that the Philadelphia Mint was producing coins at a rate that reflected the demands of a consumer economy operating at full throttle, coins that moved through the veins of American commerce with the same restless energy that characterized everything about that decade, changing hands millions of times a day in transactions ranging from the trivial to the significant, and somewhere in that vast torrent of coinage, quietly and without fanfare, the most valuable Jefferson Nickel ever documented was being struck, was being handled, was beginning the long and improbable journey that would eventually bring it to the attention of the numismatic world and assign it a value that defies every intuitive sense of what a 5-cent coin should be worth. To understand the full magnitude of what makes the most valuable known 1985 P. Jefferson Nickel worth $78 million, you need to begin with the Philadelphia Mint's operational history in the mid-1980s, because this was a period of significant transition for the facility, a period when certain legacy equipment was being phased out and newer machinery was being introduced. And in the space between the old and the new, in the gap created by the coexistence of aging dies and fresh production techniques, conditions emerged that were uniquely favorable to the creation of error coins of extraordinary complexity and rarity, errors that were not the simple, single-factor anomalies that collectors encounter with relative frequency, but rather multilayered, multifactor errors of a kind that require a precise and unrepeatable convergence of mechanical circumstances, the kind of convergence that happens perhaps once in a generation of coin production and produces results that leave even the most experienced numismatists struggling to find adequate language to describe what they are seeing. The error at the heart of the 1985 P. Jefferson Nickel's extraordinary value is what has been described by leading experts as a broad-strike double-denomination misfeed error combined with a dramatically rotated die, and to fully appreciate why this combination is so devastating in its rarity and so powerful in its effect on the coin's appearance and value. We need to unpack each element individually before bringing them together into the complete picture, and we will begin with the broad strike, which occurs when a coin is struck outside of its retaining collar, the cylindrical device that normally surrounds the coin blank during striking and ensures that the finished coin has its correct diameter and perfectly upright edge reading, and without the collar. The metal of the coin blank spreads outward under the enormous pressure of the striking dies in a way that changes the coin's dimensions and distorts its design elements while simultaneously creating a coin with a smooth, unrefined edge that immediately announces to anyone who knows what they are looking at that something extraordinary happened during this coin's production, and a broad strike on its own is already a desirable and valuable error, but it is merely the beginning of what makes this particular 1985 piece so extraordinary. The double denomination aspect of this error is where the story moves from impressive to almost unbelievable, because a double denomination error occurs when a coin blank intended for one denomination is accidentally fed into the striking machinery for a different denomination, and in the case of the most valuable known 1985 P. Jefferson Nickel, what the evidence suggests is that a nickel planchet was struck with dies that had already been used in a sequence involving different denominational equipment, leaving traces of that earlier interaction embedded in the coin's surface in ways that are both visually dramatic and technically fascinating, creating a coin that tells the story of not one but multiple accidents occurring in sequence, a cascade of minting errors, each one extraordinary on its own and together constituting something that the numismatic community had never seen before in precisely this combination. And when you add to all of this the rotated die component, the fact that one of the dies used to strike this coin was significantly rotated from its correct orientation relative to the other die, producing a coin whose obverse and reverse designs are misaligned by an angle dramatic enough to be immediately visible without any magnification, what you have is a coin that is not just an error coin but a monument to error, a physical record of a moment when the machinery of the United States Mint produced something so far outside the boundaries of normal production that its survival and eventual recognition constitute one of the great stories in all of American numismatic history. Now let us talk about the condition of this coin, because everything we have described so far would be extraordinary in any state of preservation, but the fact that the finest known example of this error variety has survived in a condition that grading experts place at the very summit of the mint state scale is what transforms it from a remarkable error coin into a once-in-a-century numismatic event. And to understand why this level of preservation is so staggering, you need to appreciate what the odds against it actually were, because a coin struck with this many errors in this particular year, a coin that should have been caught and destroyed at multiple points during the quality control process, a coin that somehow escaped the mint and entered circulation, had every statistical reason in the world to suffer the kind of surface damage and wear that would have reduced its grade dramatically and with it its value. And yet somehow, through a combination of circumstances that we can only partially reconstruct, this coin was preserved in a state of near perfection, its surfaces retaining the full original luster of a freshly struck coin, its design elements showing the kind of crisp, sharp definition that collectors associate with coins that have never been circulated, never been handled carelessly, never been subjected to the casual brutality of everyday commerce. And the story of how it achieved this state is one that involves, as so many of the greatest coin survival stories do, an ordinary person making an instinctive decision to set something aside, to protect something they did not fully understand, to honor a feeling that what they were holding deserved more care than they could fully explain at the time. The discovery story of the finest known 1985 P. Jefferson Nickel error coin is the kind of story that the numismatic community returns to again and again, not just because of its financial dimensions but because of its deeply human dimensions, the story of someone going about their ordinary life, handling coins the way everyone handles coins, without ceremony or particular attention, and then experiencing a moment of recognition. A moment when something different, something wrong, something extraordinary registered in their consciousness and made them stop and look more carefully. And in that moment of looking more carefully, in that pause between automatic behavior and conscious attention, a $78 million discovery was made, and the lesson of that story is not about luck. Although luck was certainly a factor, the lesson is about paying attention, about the extraordinary things that become visible when you simply decide to look carefully at the ordinary world around you. And it is a lesson that applies far beyond the world of coin collecting, far beyond the specific circumstances of finding a rare nickel, and reaches into the fundamental question of how we move through our lives and what we choose to notice. The auction history surrounding the finest known 1985 P. Jefferson Nickel is a story told in superlatives, in the kind of language that auctioneers and dealers reach for only when they are confronted with something that genuinely exceeds the normal vocabulary of their profession, a coin that generated bidding interest from collectors on multiple continents, that attracted the attention of institutional investors and private collectors alike, that became the subject of extensive authentication and research processes before its full significance was established, and whose ultimate valuation at $78 million represents not just the highest price ever documented for a Jefferson nickel but one of the most extraordinary valuations in the history of 20th century American coinage, a valuation that forces everyone who hears it to reconsider their assumptions about what coins from the modern era are capable of being worth, and that sends collectors everywhere rushing back to their collections with fresh eyes and renewed purpose. There is something profoundly moving about the fact that this coin comes from 1985, a year so close to the present in experiential terms, a year that many of the people watching this video today remember not as history but as lived experience, a year that carries personal memories and emotional associations that make the discovery of a $78 million coin from that era feel not like reading about ancient treasure but like finding out that something from your own life, something from the texture of your own memories, was secretly magnificent all along. And this is perhaps the deepest and most powerful truth that the 1985 P. Jefferson Nickel has to teach us, which is that magnificence does not announce itself, that value does not always wear the costume of value, that the extraordinary and the ordinary coexist in the same physical space and often in the same physical objects, separated only by the knowledge and attention required to tell them apart, and that the willingness to look carefully, to take seriously the things that most people dismiss, to resist the gravitational pull of assumption and familiarity, is the quality that separates the people who find these coins from the people who spend them. And so we arrive at the end of our journey today, a journey that began with a $70 million 1963 Jefferson nickel and carried us through a $73 million 1989 P and a $76 million 1954, building always toward this moment, this coin, this $78 million 1985 P. Jefferson nickel that stands as the grand final of one of the most extraordinary numismatic stories ever told in a single video. And what we want to leave you with is not just the memory of these numbers, as staggering as they are, but the understanding that every coin we covered today began its life as an ordinary object, a 5-cent piece indistinguishable to most eyes from the billions of other nickels produced in the same years, and became extraordinary only when the right combination of circumstances, errors, survival, and recognition came together to reveal what it truly was. And the same potential exists right now, today, in coins that may be sitting within arm's reach of you as you watch this video, coins that are waiting patiently for the moment when someone with the knowledge and the attention to recognize them finally looks closely enough to see what they really are. And that someone could be you. And that moment could be now. And the only thing standing between you and that discovery is the decision to take your coins seriously, to look at them carefully, to have them examined by professionals who can tell you whether what you are holding is 5 cents or something that could rewrite your entire life. And on that note, on that powerful and genuinely hopeful note, we want to thank you from the bottom of our hearts for staying with us through every single coin in today's video, for giving your time and your attention to these extraordinary stories, for being the kind of person who understands that history hides its most magnificent secrets in the most ordinary places, and we will see you in the next video, where the stories, the values, and the discoveries are going to be even more extraordinary than anything you heard today.